Starting with the director and choreographer, Connor Gallagher. Connor, just wave. Connor is the choreographer for the forthcoming Beetlejuice, which is coming to Broadway for Warner Brothers Theatrical Ventures. He also choreographed Tangled, the musical for Disney Cruise. We also have on the panel today Sara Wordsworth. Sara is the co-writer and creator of In Transit, Broadway's first a cappella musical. So you can see this team is highly decorated. She made her Disney Cruise Line writing debut with Frozen and Music Spectacular. If you thought the sets were fantastic, that is the work of Jason Sherwood, also joining us on the panel. He is a Drama Desk Award nominee, and his recent designs included The Chainsmokers on Saturday Night Live, New York Theater Workshop, and New York Fashion Week. He previously also designed for us on Frozen, a music spectacular for Disney Cruise Line. Responsible for projection and the incredible video design that you saw today, Rhyne. And Aaron is a two-time Drama Desk Award winner for his designs with Anastasia and A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder on Broadway.
As we all sat down to first sort of discuss kind of the approach, the idea that Belle's father wasn't an inventor as we had seen in the animated feature, but that he was a music box maker and a craftsperson, and that a music box contains a story, that felt like a very sort of interesting way into the idea that we could take a different vantage point at this particular story. So the idea that the characters, the people, the story are inside a coveted object became like a huge aspect of what we wanted to create visually on stage, to tie in the idea that we're telling a story, it's a tale as old as time, here it is, we're opening it up and then we're sharing it with you. Felt like a very intimate, very tactile, very sort of old school storytelling idea that we were able to put through kind of our contemporary sensibility as, you know, current theater artists. So the idea that the entire thing would be contained and would have an architecture that resembled itself throughout, and that we weren't sort of just bringing in big giant things that came from nowhere. The idea that we would reinvent something that you had sort of established and lived with, the architecture of the music box that he holds and then how that mirrors what's behind him, that became sort of the guiding visual principle for what we then went to create with the video and the costume.
I mean, I think we were early on inspired by the new live action film, and we wanted to bring that sensibility to the stage and have it feel very real, and we wanted the audience to sort of feel like they could live in those places and be in these worlds. But when you combine that with sort of the grand scope of all these things, the castle, this French town, how to bring that to the stage was a challenge. So I think we wanted to utilize video. We were excited about it, but we didn't want you to feel like you were watching the movie or a movie with a bunch of actors walking around in it. So pretty early on, I mean, I remember we had lunch one day and we're really trying to hammer out like how are we going to use video and keep it in a super theatrical storytelling way, so it felt like set pieces, so it felt like you were experiencing it on a theatrical journey. And we came up with the idea that we would use video, but we would use it as though they were set pieces. So that's why things sort of turn in, like houses or buildings kind of turn in as if it was a three-dimensional set piece, or like trees slide up like it would be an old-fashioned flat. So we really tried to make this merger, sort of what Jason said, of like old school and explore that visually, but also keep it very inherently theatrical. So it felt like a musical, not a film.
So the storytelling concept of a music box lent itself to the idea that video could be used in a way that we hadn't necessarily seen before in a musical, because it enveloped them. It's a panorama. From every single vantage point, every single seat in the house, you get a complete panorama view of what's happening. There's never a moment where you're looking off into a wing, which became really, really important to us and to the characters.
LED technology, what we're using now, these LED walls have come a long way in the last few years. Video has been used in theater pretty commonly in musicals for the last 10 years or so. But the projectors, which is what we would use, and there's still great projectors on the market, but we couldn't get the level of detail and crisp clarity that the new resolution allows with these LED walls. So it just opens up a whole new world. You can now create things that you're not sure if it's physically there or if it's not. It's a play of the eye, and I think Anastasia was my first chance to really explore that. That was the highest resolution LED screen that was used at that point, and I think still is, in a musical anyway. And so this was kind of a natural extension of that. I was super excited with what I was finding with Anastasia, and sort of early on when we were doing Frozen and kind of started thinking about ways we could utilize video, but in a clever new way. It seemed like the perfect extension for it. It also gives so much flexibility. So Connor could come up with a whole new idea and a different location, you know, and then the next day I could show it to him. And then, so it's a wonderful way to tell the story.
Writing process. So how did you condense the story of Beauty and the Beast and take it, you know, from the inspiration from the film and kind of condense that for the stage and the writing portion of that?
Sure. Well, you know, you sort of start these processes so long ago. We started nearly 2 years ago. So when I was brought in, the film was still in production. So even before I screened the film, I had to do my first draft of this new musical. So I had a copy of the screenplay. And at first I thought, oh boy, that's going to be a challenge. But then I embraced the words on the page, because I could really, when it's just the words, and that's your starting point, it's really a gift to be able to use them and see what are the major themes, what are the things they changed from the different versions. And then I worked very closely with the music team and with Connor and with everyone here to decide which elements, because we had to condense it, which were the elements that we were going to tell in song, what were we going to do in dance, what were we going to do scenically, all working together to tell the story so that you feel like you haven't missed a thing. And we've got some of the new songs from the score in. So it was a really fun challenge to condense it for this version.
Well, you know, I think it helped that we've all had experience working for Disney Cruise Line, and specifically the footprint of the stage. So the elevators you're looking at, where the tracks are and what automation you have available to you was something that we all knew going in. So we're able to sort of choreograph this whole show. I don't know where you were sitting, you could see the lifts going up and down, but the challenges are sometimes I need to have a scene happening over here, this lift has to be down, enabling us for the next scene. And then we've got three other people over there changing costumes for the scene after that. And the challenge of doing a show on a cruise ship, you've got a lot less crew, you've got a lot less dressers, so you really have to get creative. And you think about a number like Be Our Guest, each of those actors has a base costume that they change 3 or 4 times. So a lot of times we've choreographed a lot of the backstage traffic, a lot of the costume changes, the actors help each other, or they're built to be to get in and get out of them very, very quickly. The onstage traffic is just as challenging as the offstage, and that's something we took into consideration while we were designing this and developing it. One other thing that we were able to do, we did a workshop of the show in New York in January, and we built a mock-up of the walls that you saw. Not all the way up, but the doors were about the same height, and it was basically just these white walls that we could project on, but we could see, do we like the size of the door? Does this feel right when we walk around this wing? We even had the wings of the theater mocked up, and that was way back in January. So we were able to say, I know it's gonna take me 45 seconds to get from here to the trap. You've got to design a costume, Sarah covered, that now in that 90 seconds they have to make their next entrance, they can get in and out of this in 45 seconds without a dresser. So we had those conversations all the way through. I could show you a spreadsheet for Be Our Guest. That would knock your socks off. It's wild. But it was a really fun process. If you're a detail person, and I think I know most of us are, it's fun to roll your sleeves up and attack the artistic on stage and then go like, all right, now how do we execute this?
And choreographically, to embarrass him for a second, I think the amazing thing that Connor's done on this show was that, you know, Sarah puts together a version of this opening number of Belle that is clearly portraying a woman who is savvy and smart, and with it, who is different than other people in this town. And then Connor puts together a number where constantly people are reconfiguring apertures and moments that isolate her, that put her in different lanes, and when they turn and flip around, Aaron then takes the video and changes perspective as well. So what it creates is this really incredible marriage between storytelling, direction, choreography, and video in a way that you can tell the story of a person who's on the outside in a way that feels subliminal and really nuanced and really sophisticated for something that we've seen from one vantage point so many times on stage before.
Yeah, we worked very closely with the film team on all the different puppets we have, talking about the Mrs. Potts from the film or the Mrs. Potts from the animated film, and what the spout should be, and all the details. And it was interesting speaking about this before the film came out, because you've got those original film images which are iconic, right? And then you're watching this film going, well, what am I really struck with in this moment? Because we had to design all this way before the film came out. So it's an interesting challenge there. And then of course the scale. making sure these could read in a 1,300 seat theater. Really hard to assess that when you're in a workshop or a studio. So we actually did a test in one of the theaters in Walt Disney World. Basically had foam core cutouts of different sizes of puppets and eyes, and played with colors and how they would register, because the big difference in this version as opposed to other versions is that you really follow the emotional arc of the objects more so than ever before. And if you couldn't see their faces and register the emotion, then those scenes would just die. So again, because you have these scenes where you're asking these actors to have to carry a lot of emotional weight, and if they're hidden behind a puppet and we don't have access to them as human beings, it's going to create a real barrier between them and the audience. So to be able to see them and experience them, sometimes you're looking at the puppet, a lot of times you're looking at the actor. And I think that's slightly different than a lot of concepts for puppetry where you're seeing a full life-size horse, which is just as magical and exciting to see, just a slightly different concept because of the emotional weight these characters carry.
Story-wise, we need to remember that they were humans, and that they are still, their human form is still in there. And I think that all of the elements worked really beautifully together. The costume design for the characters is so beautiful because it's this white ombre into the dark blue, and it's sort of their life being sucked out of them.
Loves these shows.
I have a 4-year-old daughter.
Yes.
And Belle is her favorite princess, and Belle was my favorite princess. So it's so many of us. What's amazing about this particular story is he's like, tell the prom dress story. Okay, Jason.
Great story.
I loved Belle so much from the original animated film that I had a replica of her yellow dress made to wear to my junior prom. This is the story where people are going to walk into this theater and the parents have a relationship with this character and this story, and their children do now as well. So for me, the greatest joy was watching it with my daughter last night in her yellow Belle dress, and I'll never forget that.
Yeah, I think you have a relationship to this story. I mean, it's one of the first animated features I ever saw, and it was the first Broadway show I ever saw. And I think we can get like a little bit cynical and a little bit hard on ourselves, like, oh my God, the hat isn't on right, or the table didn't move fast enough, and we watch the show and we tweak out about it. But we were sitting there all in a row together, which was really special because some of these people are, you know, some of my favorite people in addition to collaborators in general. And we were all sitting there, and I looked down the aisle, and there was this little girl leant on the aisle like this, and she was utterly captivated. And I just, you know, I'm hoping for a life in the theater. So far, so good. And just seeing someone like look out and be in total awe of something that we helped make is a very, very gratifying experience. It's really special.
I think for me, the great thing about designing for Disney, in general really, and from a designer that works in technology, they're not scared of big, bold ideas. There's not another company in the world that if we had presented this first idea with these movable LED walls that were going to be in rep with other shows, they would have laughed us out of the room. And with Disney, they're like, that's crazy, okay, you know, and then they go away and we come back and we keep meeting, but they figure it out, and having the opportunity to design something so big and so bold that doesn't exist yet is incredible, and that's why I love working for Disney, and that's why I keep coming back, because it's really a honor and an exciting opportunity.
I remember seeing the Beauty and the Beast show at what used to be MGM Studios when I was, I don't know, 6 years old, and I remember sitting somewhere in first, second, or third row or something, and I remember a performer just looking at me and feeling sort of really feeling very intimate and special, and I'll never forget it. You have those moments as kids that just sort of burned in your brain. That's one of them. So it was probably one of the first shows I had seen. I probably didn't even know what I was watching, but I sort of remember this magical moment. And you know, the theater here is slightly unconventional in that you don't buy a ticket for the show. The ritual of going to have a pre-theater dinner or something, you could just wander into the theater on any night. And the fact that some little kid that maybe has no interest in theater could wander in and take a seat and say, I'm going to watch 10 minutes of this, and maybe be swept away by how magical it is, by the video, by the costumes, by something, and get inspired, and that could be their introduction to theater, is really exciting to me. So to be a small part of that is the greatest joy for me.